Welcome to Legends of Dust and Iron, where forgotten women of the Wild West rise from the dust, and the silence of history is shattered by the sound of truth. It begins in silence, not peace, but the kind that comes before thunder. A dust storm coils over the plains like a living thing, hissing against rusted barbed wire, clawing at the sky with dirt-stained fingers. Horses whinny in the distance, unsettled. A saloon door bangs open, then shut, then open again, hollow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat coming undone. And in the middle of it all stands a woman. Long coat snapping like a whip in the wind, a rifle was slung across her shoulder, eyes fixed on the horizon, like she's staring straight into the soul of the frontier. Her name is Belle Starr, but they don't call her that, not out here. They call her the Bandit Queen. And she didn't ride into legend. She carved it into the dust. One bullet, one betrayal, one outlaw at a time. Before the newspapers made her infamous, before the marshals made her a target, before the men she loved made her dangerous, she was just a girl in a man's world, walking barefoot through blood and fire, choosing not to kneel. This is the story of how she became the first crowned queen of American outlawry. But it's also the story of every woman who followed through smoke and gallows, through silence and scandal, through a history too afraid to remember them. This is where the legend begins. But before the black velvet and pistols, before the courtrooms and scandals, before her murder, unsolved to this day. She was just Myra Maybelle Shirley, a girl with too much pride and too little patience for men who thought the West belonged only to them. This is how the Queen of Dust was born. The war had already taken everything. By 1864, Carthage, Missouri was a graveyard of splintered fences and burned homes, stripped clean by raiders and blue-coated soldiers alike. 13-year-old Belle stood barefoot outside the ruins of her family's farm, smoke curling from the ash of what had once been a home. Her father, John Shirley, a proud Southern man, stared into the fire with something broken in his jawline. Not fear, but fury held too long. They had nothing now, not the land, not the cattle, not even a flag worth swearing to. Her mother tried to gather the younger children, hands shaking. Belle didn't cry, didn't speak. She walked to the back fence, where her pony used to be tied, and found a piece of rope, half buried in the dirt. She wrapped it around her wrist like a promise. "They want us gone," her brother muttered beside her.
Belle didn't answer. She was staring at the road, already imagining the next town, the next fight, the next way to take something back.
The family moved to Syene, Texas, just outside Dallas. But Texas wasn't peace. Texas was a wound, open, festering, lawless. It was here that Belle got her real education, not from books, though she read plenty, but from whispers in the saloons, from the stench of jail cells, from the way men lowered their voices when her father passed, his Confederate loyalties worn like armor. She learned to shoot, learned to ride like hell was behind her, learned that beauty was a weapon, but only if you knew how to aim it. By 17, Belle was already infamous in Syene, not for crime, but for daring. She rode into town alone. She wore pistols like earrings. She challenged men twice her age to shooting contests, and won. She smoked cigars. She spat. She stared people down like she'd invented the act. And in every corner of town, men whispered, "That Shirley girl's gonna burn this place down." They were right. She just hadn't picked the match yet. In 1866, Belle married a man named Jim Reed, a known horse thief with ties to the James Younger gang. She didn't marry for love. She married for the promise of fire. And Jim delivered. He brought her into the circle of outlaws who didn't just steal, they declared war on the banks and railroads that were carving the West into cages. Belle wasn't a bystander. She rode with them, cooked for them, carried messages, hid loot, and on one occasion pulled a pistol on a sheriff trying to arrest her husband. The law started printing her name in headlines. Bandit Queen, Belle Starr, the outlaw bride of the James gang. It wasn't accurate, but it was dangerous, and that was good enough for Belle. Jim Reed was wild, the kind of man who looked good on a horse and better with a price on his head. But he was also weak, and in the West, weakness is blood in the water. After a few years of living fast, bank robberies, safe house raids, nights lit by moonshine and bullets, Jim started to crack. He drank too much, gambled harder, told stories he shouldn't. And somewhere between a poker table and a double cross, he betrayed the gang. They found his body in 1874 face down in a creek near Paris, Texas, shot in the back. Belle was 26, widowed, wanted, and carrying a child. The newspapers loved it. Beautiful Belle Starr, widow of a notorious bandit, on the run. But Belle didn't run. Not far. She stayed just out of reach, bouncing between Indian territory and the fringes of Texas, carving a reputation like initials into a tree trunk. She raised her daughter, Pearl, between hideouts and saloons, taught her how to ride, how to lie, and how to shoot. Pearl would one day become a madam in her own right, but that's another story. For now, Belle Starr was alone, but far from defeated. It was here, among the red dirt trails of Indian territory, that Belle found new ground to rule. She remarried, this time to Sam Starr, a Cherokee outlaw from a family deep in the criminal veins of the territory. Together, they built a hideout on the Canadian River, called it Younger's Bend, named for Cole Younger, who Belle still had deep connections with from her James gang days. Their house was no mansion, but it was something more important, untouchable. Outside U.S. jurisdiction, hidden, protected by tribal politics and blood ties. Belle wasn't just surviving now, she was thriving. She organized thefts, planned smuggling routes, kept ledgers of who owed what, wore black velvet dresses while holding court at dinner with pistols on her hip. "Call me a queen," she once said, "but remember, queens have armies." The years that followed were a strange kind of glory. Belle Starr, the woman the law couldn't catch and the men couldn't tame, ruled Younger's Bend like a monarch. She kept order, paid bribes, handed out justice with a sharp tongue and a sharper Colt. Even the Pinkertons avoided her territory, not because they couldn't go there, but because they didn't want to not come back. She wore a plumed black hat, kept 2 pistols holstered across her hips. And when she rode into Fort Smith or Muskogee, people got quiet, because Belle Starr wasn't folklore anymore. She was real, and the real thing was always more dangerous. By 1886, Belle Starr had carved out more than a reputation. She'd carved a kingdom from blood and bribes, from stolen horses and outlaw hospitality. But kingdoms fall, and outlaws don't die in bed. Her husband, Sam Starr, was shot and killed at a Christmas party during a drunken argument. Some say by a rival thief, others whisper a bounty hunter. Belle found him in the dirt, blood soaking his shirt like a funeral sash. He wasn't the best man she'd known, but he'd stood beside her when she had nothing. Now she had less. The newspapers had already turned her into a myth. Queen of the Outlaws loses her king. They didn't care that she was grieving. They wanted spectacle, and they got it. That same year, Belle was arrested for horse theft. The court at Fort Smith, run by the infamous hanging judge Isaac Parker, wanted to make an example of her. Belle didn't flinch. She stood in the courtroom in full black velvet, hat plumed, pistols removed only because the bailiff made her. She denied everything. "I ain't never stole a thing that didn't already belong to someone who'd stolen it first." The courtroom laughed. Parker didn't. He sentenced her to 9 months at the Detroit House of Corrections. Prison wasn't rough. It was humiliating. Belle Starr, outlaw queen, rider of the Cherokee Strip, friend of Cole Younger and lover of gunmen, reduced to laundry duty and silent meals. The worst part? The mirrors. Every hallway had one, and every time she caught her reflection, she saw it, a woman aging, not soft, not broken, but human. And that was almost worse. She wrote letters to friends, smoked contraband cigars, told stories that scared the other inmates. And when she walked out, she did so with her head high and the papers waiting. Belle Starr, Queen of Bandits, released from jail. But the wind had shifted, the world was changing, and Belle could feel it in her bones. February 3rd, 1889. The trail near Younger's Bend was quiet, too quiet. Belle was riding home alone on a borrowed mare, a Sunday afternoon. She wore her black coat and carried a small bag of goods. And then it happened. 2 blasts, shotgun, close range. The horse panicked. Belle was thrown, bleeding, into the red clay. They say she crawled a few feet before collapsing. When they found her, she was already cold. She was 40 years old, shot in the back. The killer was never identified. Some blamed her son Ed, others pointed to a tenant she'd recently evicted. Some said it was the ghost of Jim Reed finally catching up to her. But the truth died with her, just like legends always do. Belle Starr died on a dirt trail. No trial, no last words, no one to hold her hand or hear her story. Just dust and silence and a smoking shotgun. But death wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Because the moment her body hit the earth, the stories rose like wildfire. Shot by her own son, betrayed by a lover, cursed for crossing the James gang. Dime novels printed. Suddenly, Belle Starr wasn't just an outlaw, she was a legend. That she led posses into ambushes, that she seduced judges and outdrew bounty hunters. Most of it wasn't true, but Belle had always known, truth ain't what gets remembered, it's the story they write down. And they wrote hers in fire. Her daughter, Pearl Starr, was 20 when her mother died. She didn't cry publicly, didn't give interviews, but weeks after the funeral, she rode into Fort Smith wearing her mother's hat. She opened a parlor house, high class, velvet wallpaper, whiskey poured like a promise. She hung a pistol over the bar, and when someone asked if she was Belle's girl, she answered, "Ain't no girl here, just women who don't kneel." Pearl would become her own kind of outlaw, not with guns, but with survival. She made money, bribed cops, never apologized. And that legacy, the female legacy of rebellion, grit, and refusal, stretched out from the ashes of Belle's murder into generations of forgotten outlaws. Women who weren't saints, weren't villains, just real, bleeding, raging, surviving. Today, Belle Starr's grave still stands in Oklahoma, a modest headstone marked the Bandit Queen. But the real monument is what she left behind, a blueprint for every woman who ever rode against the wind, a memory that refused to stay buried. A question carved into every Western myth. What if the Queen never needed a king? She didn't just survive the Wild West. She owned it, rode it bareback, branded it with her name. And when they finally shot her, when they thought they'd erased her, the dust rose instead. And in it, her legend rode on. You've just witnessed the rise of Belle Starr, the Dust Queen of the West. Subscribe to Legends of Dust and Iron for the next chapter in the saga of the women history tried to bury, but the dust refused to forget. The desert does not weep, it buries. Buried in its silence are bones and names, some etched into stone, others whispered through outlaw ballads carried by the wind. And in that wind, if you listen close, you'll hear her name. Laura Bullion. They called her the Rose of the Wild Bunch. A flower blooming in blood, a gun tucked beneath velvet skirts, the soft voice behind stolen horses and sharpened lies. But Laura wasn't just another woman riding behind men. She rode beside them, slept with her pistol, smiled at wanted posters, and vanished before the gallows could catch her scent. This isn't the story of love, it's the story of reckoning, of a woman who kissed legends and watched them hang, of a girl who chose crime over cage, of a rose that never wilted, only disappeared. The desert wind was different in Texas. It didn't whisper like it did in Oklahoma. It didn't mourn. It didn't plead. It hissed, low and mean, like a snake that had already bitten and was waiting to see if you'd survive. The sun had no mercy here. It pressed down like a judge's gavel, sealing fates and drying bones. Dust lifted from the earth and swirled in mad spirals across the barren flatlands, each gust carrying pieces of something long dead. And out there, riding like a storm in silken grit, came the girl they called the Wild Rose. Laura Bullion. She was 19, maybe younger, maybe older. The truth depended on who you asked, or how close you'd ever gotten to her pistol. She didn't look like the stories said. She was smaller, sharper, eyes too knowing for her age, a mouth that never smiled unless she meant to kill or seduce, and sometimes she didn't bother choosing between the two. Her hat was pulled low, but not to hide, to dare. She wore a velvet coat, even in the heat, stolen maybe from a banker's wife or a saloon singer who hadn't lived long enough to miss it. Her boots were cracked, silver spurs dulled by dirt and blood. She rode a black mare named Violet. The name didn't fit the horse, but it did fit the girl. Because Laura Bullion was a rose, yes, but not the kind you gave your sweetheart. She was the kind that bloomed from a grave. The town she was riding toward was called Marlow. Just a few buildings, a rail spur, a general store, and a bank too new to have scars. She wasn't coming for the money. Not this time. She was coming for a man who had once given her a silver necklace and a reason to trust. He took both back, and she was here to collect interest. She rode in with a slow, deliberate pace, not rushing, not waiting. Children stopped their games, dogs barked and went silent. The shopkeepers paused mid-measure, thread still hanging from their lips. A woman riding alone was unusual. A woman like her? That was a warning. She dismounted in front of the saloon. The sign above the door read, "The Dry Star." Letters faded, one corner dangling from a broken nail. She tied Violet and walked through the batwing doors without looking up. Inside, the air was thick with pipe smoke and lies. The piano stopped playing. Every head turned. Some recognized her. Most just knew they were looking at danger in a dress. She stepped to the bar. "Whiskey, the real kind," she said. The bartender, older than he wanted to be, slid a bottle toward her without a word. She didn't drink yet. Instead, she scanned the room. There, in the far corner, sitting with two other men, pretending to be calm, was Eli Boone, the man who taught her how to pick a pocket and how to break a promise. He'd shaved his beard and lost weight, but not enough to lose the stink of cowardice. She picked up the bottle, walked slow across the room. Every bootstep echoed like thunder in a drought. Eli looked up, pale, sweating. "Laura," he said, voice cracking. "Didn't expect to see you." "You never do," she said, and smashed the bottle across his face. The saloon exploded into noise, boots scuffling, chairs crashing, gasps cutting through the air like knives through silk. Eli Boone hit the floor hard, one hand over his bleeding face, the other scrambling for something, maybe his pride, maybe a weapon. Laura didn't wait to find out. She drew her pistol with the casual grace of someone who'd practiced in the mirror of a cracked train car long ago, when she was learning to look dangerous before she even was. "You lied to me in Santa Fe," she said. "Then you lied again in Denver. I'm here to find out if you've learned how to tell the truth." Eli's voice was muffled under the blood. "I didn't mean—" Laura cocked the hammer. "Don't finish that sentence." The two men at his table moved for their guns. She turned toward them, calm and sure. "I wouldn't," she said. And they didn't. The bartender, trembling, reached for the shotgun under the bar. Laura didn't even look at him. "Keep your hands where they are, old man," she said, her voice like cold iron. "I've already got enough ghosts." She grabbed Eli by the collar and dragged him out into the street. Sunlight hit his face like a punishment. People watched from doorways, windows, even rooftops, but no one interfered, because that was Laura Bullion, the wild rose, and this was her reckoning. She dropped him in the dirt and stepped back. He coughed, spit blood, tried to rise. She aimed again. "I asked you to stand with me. You swore you would. Then you sold us out for a badge and a bag of silver." Eli shook his head, terrified. I didn't know they were going to kill him." Her voice cracked. "You knew they'd try." Behind her eyes, a memory. Butch Cassidy, grinning in the desert sun, the way he did when the law was closing in and he knew it didn't matter. The way he looked at Laura like she was already part of the gang, already wild. She was 17 the first time she rode with them. They called her Rosie, said she was too pretty to be mean. She showed them otherwise. She helped them crack safes, fake documents, seduce guards, and disappear across borders. But what she remembered most was the dust, that perfect golden trail behind them as they vanished into the outlaw sky. The wild bunch was a family. Of thieves, of liars, of survivors, but a family nonetheless, and Eli, he was the one who turned. "You gave them the camp coordinates," she said. Eli looked around, desperate. "I didn't mean—" A gunshot cracked the sky. Laura didn't pull the trigger, but someone did. Eli's chest burst red. He dropped flat. Laura turned on instinct, firing in the direction of the shot. 2 figures on horseback, rifles out, riding hard. Bounty hunters. She grabbed Eli's pistol, mounted Violet in a blur of movement, and rode. Gunfire behind her. Shouts. The smell of cordite and fear. Violet sprinted like she understood everything. Laura looked back once. Eli was a blotch in the dust. The past didn't bleed for long in Texas. No name, no photographs, no grave, just whispers in courthouse ledgers, and the sound of a woman's boots echoing through the gallows that never claimed her. Catherine Harney. She didn't ride with a gang, didn't need a lover to earn her place in history. She walked the outlaw road alone, with a revolver in one hand and silence in the other. Some say she was born from vengeance. Others say she was law once, before she turned on the very badge she wore. But everyone agrees on one thing. When Catherine Harney rode into town, death rode in behind her. This is not a tale of romance. This is a bullet cutting clean through the lies of history. A woman who was too fast to catch, too smart to confess, and too damn dangerous to hang. It was said the rope snapped when they tried to hang her, that the storm rolled in so fast, the clouds cracked open above the gallows before the trapdoor ever did. Thunder shook the scaffold. Rain fell like bullets. The sheriff's hands trembled as he reached for the lever. And when the dust cleared, the woman at the end of the rope was still breathing. Catherine Harney. The name rolled off tongues like a dare. Half myth, half memory, all fire. She was called a murderer, a widowmaker, a hex, a gunslinger too fast to bury and too cursed to break. But she was never called weak. The first time she killed a man, she was 13. Her father had been a deputy in New Mexico Territory, tall, straight, and filled with the kind of law that could smile while it burned you. He taught Catherine to ride, shoot, read the Bible, and obey. Only one of those stuck. One night her father came home drunk, carrying a wound from a fight he wouldn't talk about. He slapped her mother, broke the lamp, tore the kitchen to shreds. Catherine stood in the hallway holding her father's old Colt, her arms shaking so bad she could barely breathe. He turned. He laughed, and she pulled the trigger. One shot, center chest. The Bible never said what to do next. So Catherine buried him beneath the cottonwood tree and rode west with the dawn. By 17, she was working as a trail scout for a cattle outfit out of Abilene. Men laughed at first, a girl with a rifle and quiet eyes. Then they watched her ride through storms, shoot a snake at 30 yards, and never lose her calm when surrounded by wolves. They stopped laughing. Some even followed her. One of them was named Dean Mercer. He taught her how to bluff, how to fix a saddle with broken rope, and how to play cards like you meant to win. She taught him how to survive gunfire. They made a good pair. For a while. Then came the night in El Paso. It was supposed to be a simple job. Get in, get the ledger, get out. A crooked banker, a sealed vault, and a railroad company too rich to notice. But someone talked. The Pinkertons were waiting. Dean was shot in the leg. Catherine took a bullet through the shoulder. They got away, barely, bleeding into the desert under a full moon that seemed to laugh at them. They hid in an abandoned line shack for 3 days. She cleaned his wound. He read her lines from a book of poems he carried, pages dog-eared and marked with blood. She fell asleep beside him, for once unafraid. When she woke, he was gone. So was the gold, so was the book. That was the last time she trusted a man who smiled too easy. She wandered after that. Tucson, Dodge, Wichita, wherever the map folded and the law bent. She didn't steal for greed. She stole to keep moving. She took from banks because they locked up the future and loaned it back at interest. She took from rich traders who drank from crystal and spat on their stable boys. She never shot to kill unless killing was the only way out. But she always kept the book. She found another copy of the same poetry Dean used to read to her. It traveled with her, a softer weapon. Proof she hadn't gone all hard, not yet. They tried to hang her in Missouri, accused her of killing a marshal during a bank robbery, said she fired first, said she laughed while doing it. She didn't bother to deny it. The judge didn't look her in the eyes. The jury took 20 minutes. The gallows were already built. But the storm came fast. The rope broke. She survived. And when they tried again, the sheriff found his house on fire and a note pinned to the door. You can't kill what's already burning. She disappeared after that, vanished into legend. Some said she sailed to Mexico, started a ranch, and lived under another name. Others claimed she joined a traveling show, shot aces from the sky for coins and gasps. But the smart ones said nothing. They knew that Catherine Harney wasn't a woman you hunted. She was a lesson you learned too late. The desert doesn't keep secrets. It erases them. Wind smooths over the places where blood fell. Sun bleaches bones into brittle echoes. Names carved in stone get swallowed by sand. But sometimes, just sometimes, it remembers. And if you follow the old Apache trails east of Silver City, there's a cave no maps mark. Locals call it Widow's Hollow. They say she lived there once, the woman who wouldn't die. After the failed hanging, Catherine Harney rode through rain for 2 days straight. No food, no sleep. Her shoulder wound reopened, her hat soaked through, her horse half dead. She didn't stop, didn't speak, just followed the sky like it owed her something. She made it to Widow's Hollow on the 3rd night, collapsed inside, and dreamed. In the dream, her father stood in a field of fire. He held his Bible in one hand, a pistol in the other. He said, "There's only 2 kinds of justice in this world, the one they write in books and the one you write with blood." Then he pointed the pistol at her and smiled. She woke screaming. The echo bounced off the cave walls and out into the dawn. Vultures circled overhead. She laughed bitterly. "Not yet," she told them. "Go find someone who stayed dead." For weeks, she stayed hidden. She cleaned the wound with whiskey and river water, boiled cactus for food, laid traps for snakes. She wrote in the margins of the poetry book. Not verses, names. People who betrayed her, people she spared. And one name she crossed out slowly, Dean Mercer. She wrote again after a month, not to hide, to haunt. She returned to Dodge disguised as a bounty hunter, claimed she was chasing herself. The sheriff, red-faced and proud, told her the story of Catherine Harney. She was quick, he said, but not quick enough. They'll get her next time. She smiled behind her scarf. "I hope not," she said. I heard she only kills the ones who talk too much." She left Dodge that night and rode into history, a mining town carved into the bones of the earth. Two brothers ran the town, Jed and Amos Griggs, owned the mine, the saloon, the law, treated women like cards in a poker game, tradable, beatable, forgettable. Catherine walked into their saloon wearing black, asked for a room, got a laugh, and a hand on her waist. She broke that hand in 3 places before breakfast. They called her out at noon, told her to leave town or face them. She didn't blink, didn't speak, just stood in the middle of Main Street, sun blazing above, dust swirling around her boots. Her coat flapped open, revealing 2 pistols. She looked like she'd stepped out of a nightmare written by God. The brothers laughed. The town held its breath. The first shot came from Amos, too slow. She dropped him with one to the chest. Jed hesitated, called her a witch. She answered with a bullet through his gun hand, then another through his knee. Then she walked over, leaned down, and whispered something no one heard. He screamed, then passed out. After that, no one in Calico Gulch ever called her by name. She was just the woman who emptied the town. Kansas City was loud, fast, and greedy. It chewed people up and spat them out into alleyways lit with lamplight and regret. For most outlaws, it was the last stop before they vanished, into prison, into the bottle, or into the ground. Catherine Harney didn't come to vanish. She came to find someone, and to kill someone else. It had been 5 years since she'd last seen Dean Mercer. She'd heard the stories, how he was running cons in the city under a new name, how he wore fine suits now, tipped gold coins to the men who opened carriage doors, and told tales about the Wild West like he'd outlived it. He hadn't outlived her. She arrived by train, wore a red dress, gloves, and a feathered hat. She didn't bring a rifle, just 2 pistols, hidden beneath lace and silk. The city smelled like ash and ambition. Horses sweated in the streets. Smoke poured from chimneys like the sky was on fire, and nobody cared. She checked into a boarding house using the name Miss Mayfield. The woman who ran it looked her up and down and said, "You look like trouble." Catherine smiled. "Not yet," she said. She found him at a poker table in the Monarch Hotel, drinking from a silver flask and talking like he'd never run from anything in his life. He didn't see her at first, didn't recognize the eyes watching from the back corner of the room. But when he did, he froze, dropped a card, said one word, "Damn." That night he sent her a note, written in the same lazy scrawl he used when they were young and wild and stupid. "Meet me at midnight. The train yard. You deserve an answer." She burned the note after reading it twice, but she showed up anyway. It rained. Of course it rained. The train yard was empty except for one lantern swinging on a post, and Dean, leaning against a crate, coat soaked, eyes full of something like shame. "Before you shoot me," he said, I want you to know. I never planned to leave you that night. I was scared." Catherine stepped closer. "You were armed." "I was still scared." She raised the gun. He didn't flinch. "I didn't take all the gold," he said. I didn't care about the gold." That surprised him. "You don't have it in you," he said. "Not to kill me, not anymore." She looked at him long and hard, then handed him an envelope. He opened it. Inside was a photo. A child, a boy, black hair, her eyes, Dean's mouth. "He's 6, she said. Dean's knees almost gave out. "He doesn't know who you are, and if you're lucky, he never will." She turned and walked into the rain, and this time he didn't follow. She disappeared for real after that. No newspapers, no arrests, just gaps. People whispered. Some said she'd gone north, working trains under the name Mrs. Kelton. Others swore she'd joined a gang of women robbers in Montana who only stole from the railroad and gave the rest to widows. One rumor said she opened a school for girls. Another said she became a bounty hunter, but only hunted men who beat women. None of it was ever confirmed, because Catherine didn't leave stories. She left scars, until one day, a sheriff in Wyoming received a letter with no return address. It read, "If you're still looking, stop. You had your chance. You missed. CH." Time is cruel to outlaws. It wears away their legends like wind on stone, blurs their names, turns bullets into footnotes. But for Catherine Harney, time wasn't the enemy. Obscurity was the goal, and she nearly pulled it off. The last confirmed sighting came in 1909, Cheyenne, Wyoming. A drifter named Clara Hensley, no relation to any known family, showed up to rent a cabin just outside town. Paid 6 months in advance, asked for nothing, spoke to no one, but she carried a leather book with poetry in it. And she had the walk of someone who had spent too many years dodging bullets. The town didn't ask questions, and Catherine Harney gave none in return. Every 2 weeks, she came down for supplies, flour, tobacco, canned peaches, always alone, always watchful. Her boots were still the kind made for quick escapes, and her hair stayed pinned up like it might unravel in a fight. She watched the doors, the mirrors, the sky. Some habits don't die, even when you're trying to. A girl named Eva used to bring her eggs. Just 13, poor and curious, she saw through the silence. One day she asked, "Were you really a gunfighter?" Catherine looked at her for a long time, then smiled and said, "No, I was worse." But Eva kept coming. She asked about horses, outlaws, and whether women ever won. And one day Catherine gave her something more than answers, an old revolver, oiled, clean, unloaded. "This saved me once," she said. "Don't let it be the only thing that does." Eva held it like it was a piece of the stars. That winter, the snow climbed up the cabin walls like time trying to bury her. Catherine's hands began to shake, her lungs rasped with every breath. She knew what was coming, and for once, she wasn't afraid. She wrote 3 letters, one to Eva, tender and wordless in its farewell, one to no one, full of memories, regrets, and truths, and one to the boy. She never mailed it, just folded it into a poetry book and slid it under the bed. If someone found it, they'd know. If not, she'd already lived enough truth for 2 lives. When Eva came by in March, the fire was out. The door creaked open like it had lost its voice. Catherine lay on the bed, eyes closed, peaceful, as if she'd finally outrun the last bullet. Eva buried her beneath the old tree behind the cabin. No name, just 2 words carved into stone, still standing. They say Eva became one of the most feared bounty hunters in the Dakota Territory. They say she carried a revolver with CH scratched into the handle, only hunted men who hurt women. Always gave them a choice. Leave quietly or leave in pieces. They called her the girl with the ghost gun. She never corrected them, because some legends are meant to echo. Catherine Harney, the gunslinger they couldn't hang, never asked for a statue, never wanted a story. But the desert remembered. The wind still carries her name, and every time a girl learns to shoot, to ride, to run, Catherine rides with her. She was born in the cradle of outlaws, raised between the buttes of Utah and the bloodlines of rebellion. Josie Bassett never had to run from the law, because the law was too afraid to chase her. While bullets flew and banks burned, Josie brewed coffee for the wild bunch in the shade of her family ranch, her rifle leaning by the door and a knowing smile on her lips. She wasn't just a friend to outlaws, she was their home. But make no mistake, Josie didn't need protection. She knew the land like she knew loyalty, fierce, wild, and unforgiving. This is the story of a woman who outlived the West itself, who watched her lovers die, her country change, and the myths fade into dust, while she kept riding. Until the end, the wind moved through the high desert like a whisper from the grave, stirring the red cliffs of Browns Park in the last amber light of evening. The jagged rocks towered like ancient witnesses, and juniper trees twisted with the age-old ache of the land. A distant coyote howled, not from hunger or rage, but from memory. This was the land where the law faded and legends began. This was Josie Bassett's kingdom. She hadn't been born an outlaw, but she was born on the outer edge of America, a place where survival meant learning to fire a rifle, break a horse, lie to a lawman, and read the sky like scripture. They called her wild, reckless, dangerous. But Josie Bassett was simply free, and in a world that wanted women to kneel, sew, and smile, that freedom was the most dangerous crime of all. She was just 15 the first time she aimed a rifle at a U.S. Marshal. She didn't blink or flinch. Standing on the front porch of her family's homestead, dust on her skirt, boots dug into the earth, she looked like the whole frontier was growing straight out of her spine. The marshal said he was tracking thieves, wanted to search the barn. Josie smiled a crooked smile, the kind earned from castrating bulls and shooting coyotes before breakfast. "There's nothing in there but hay and ghosts," she told him. He didn't laugh, but he didn't move either. She lifted the rifle just a little higher and added, "You can come back with a warrant or with a preacher. Either way, you'll leave the same, empty-handed." And he did. They all did. Because Brown's Park wasn't just ranch land. It was a borderland, a no-man's land. A place where fugitives stopped running not because they gave up, but because they finally found a place to breathe. The Bassett Ranch became more than a home. It was a haven, where bandits shared stew, whiskey, and stolen stories without fear of the badge. And Josie didn't just live there. She ruled it. Her mother, Elizabeth Bassett, was a legend in her own right, part rancher, part schoolteacher, part storm in a dress. She taught Josie and her sister Anne to read Shakespeare, rope calves, and question every law written by a man who'd never lived off the land. "We don't raise daughters to be wives," she said. "We raise 'em to be wild." And wild they were. Josie knew them all: Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, Elsie Lay, Kid Curry, Laura Bullion. Some she knew better than others. Some left behind perfume on pillows and letters in drawers, especially Butch. Older, charming, and smiling like he'd already seen the end of the world and found it funny. He always returned to the Bassett Ranch after a heist, as if it were the only place that could hold him for a night. Josie was 16 when he first kissed her, 17 when she knew he'd never stay. But she never asked him to. Josie didn't believe in cages, not for animals, not for men, not for herself. She rode with him once across Utah's open basin, through ghost towns and scorched earth. They camped under stars that looked like they'd been nailed into the heavens by ghosts. He told her stories, banks, betrayals, gunfights. She told him nothing. He liked that about her. She was mystery in Denim and Thunder, rode like a Comanche, shot like Oakley, quoted Byron by firelight. "If I ever settle down, it'll be with you," he said once. "Then don't," she replied. That was the last time he ever mentioned love. Anne Bassett was fire to Josie's canyon stillness. Where Josie was cool, calm, and fierce in silence, Anne burned bright, fast, loud, uncontainable. Sisters by blood, rivals by nature, wild in different directions, loyal in their own way. That loyalty cracked when they both loved the same man, Butch Cassidy. He never said who he loved more, didn't need to. The wild bunch lived on silence and soft betrayals. But when he kissed Anne under the old juniper, the same one where Josie had once carved their initials, the world shifted. Josie found out, of course. She always did. But she didn't rage or cry or throw a plate. She poured herself a drink, sat on the porch, and watched the storm roll in. Butch avoided her eyes for weeks, and when he left that spring, he didn't kiss either of them goodbye. Anne never apologized, not then, not ever. Life on the range didn't slow down for heartbreak, and neither did the Bassett sisters. They kept riding together, branding cattle and hosting outlaws like nothing had shifted between them. But something had. A space wider than the Colorado River opened between their hearts. Sometimes Love isn't a bullet. It's a silence. Even so, the world took notice. The Bassett sisters carved their legend into the West like initials into a tree. They rustled cattle from greedy barons who tried to steal their grazing land, and in return they painted their defiance in dust and fire across territory lines no man dared cross. Lawmen cursed them, outlaws revered them, newspapers gave them names, the bandit queens of Brown's Park, Helen Petticoats, sisters of the Wild Bunch. But it wasn't just stories, it was war. The cattle barons came for them next. They wanted the Bassett land, their water, their power. They sent hired guns, Pinkertons, and threats wrapped in velvet and blood. One night Josie caught a man trying to torch the barn. She shot him in the leg, dragged him behind the corral, and tied him with her own lasso. He begged. She stayed silent. By morning he was gone. No one ever found him. But word traveled fast. Don't cross the Bassetts. They fight like wolves and bury like farmers. But the worst betrayal didn't come from a stranger. It came from one of their own, Tom "Shaky" Dillard. He had ridden with the gang for 2 years, shared meals, shared stories, swore loyalty. But when the law caught up with him, he folded like cheap linen, sold them all out, told the Pinkertons everything, Butch's next move, the names of every ranch hand the sisters trusted, even the hidden trails and passwords they used to vanish into the hills. By the time Josie found out, he was already gone. She didn't cry, didn't sleep, just packed her bag, saddled her horse, and rode out before dawn. For 3 days, she tracked him across the high country, found him drunk in a saloon in Monticello. She walked in like death in spurred boots, shot him clean through the hand before he could flinch, and sat down next to him like a ghost come to collect. No one knows what she whispered before she left, but they say he never picked up a gun again. By the early 1900s, the Wild Bunch was bleeding out. Some fell to bullets, some to betrayal, some just vanished like smoke after a shot. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid headed south, Bolivia, maybe Argentina. Some say they died there, some say they didn't. Josie never believed in graves without bodies. She kept one saddle empty, just in case. Brown's Park began to change. The railroads came, dragging with them banks, fences, wires, and the dull hum of so-called progress, the kind that killed freedom in quiet increments. The outlaws stopped coming, but the law didn't. Pinkertons kept knocking, but Josie never ran. She stayed. She kept ranching, trading, living, like the frontier hadn't ended, only changed shape. Then came her deepest loss. Her mother, Elizabeth Bassett, passed in her sleep one winter morning. The woman who had taught her to ride hard and never say sorry, who raised her with Shakespeare and grit, was gone. Josie sat beside her for hours, silent, her hand around her mother's. She whispered those same old lines from Julius Caesar they once read under the cottonwoods. Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. She buried her under the great cottonwood where sky kissed land. No priest, no hymn, just Josie, a shovel, and the wind. That same year, Anne left, said she was done, with the law, with the dust, with the ghosts. She married a rancher in Vernal and tried to settle. They wrote letters now and then, but the pages held more silence than stories. Too many names left unsaid. Too much history neither dared revisit. Josie stayed, even when the money dried up, even when the cattle thinned, even when the law circled like buzzards too afraid to land. She raised her own food, brewed her own whiskey, fought off mountain lions with a pitchfork, chopped her own wood, and warmed her own bones. She lived like the West wasn't over. It had just gone quiet. In 1936, they arrested her. 70 years old, still wearing boots, still carrying a rifle, still cussing like a canyon wind. They claimed she was butchering stolen cattle. She laughed right in the judge's face. "They were on my land," she said. "If you're dumb enough to let your herd wander, you're dumb enough to lose it." The courtroom went silent. The judge didn't fine her. Just told her to go home and stop being trouble. She tipped her hat, then did the exact opposite. Josie Bassett kept living like it was still 1895. No electricity, no running water, just a cabin, a dog, a few chickens, and the memories of 100 lives. Teen girls used to visit just to listen. She'd sit on the porch, rifle near the door, spinning tales of shootouts and romances and whiskey warmed over stolen fire. When they asked if she missed it, she'd look out over the land and say, "I don't miss a damn thing. I am it." She died in 1964 at the age of 90, in her own bed, with stew simmering on the stove and her rifle resting by the door. They buried her beside her mother, under the same cottonwood tree that had watched over them both. Her gravestone reads, "Josie Bassett, outlaw, rancher, wild," and nothing else, because what more needs saying? There are flowers that only bloom in dust. Josie was one of them. Delicate-looking things, born of stone and drought, roots twisted into canyon walls, petals drinking from storms long past. That's the kind of flower Rose Dunn was. They called her the Rose of the Cimarron. Beautiful, elusive, and dangerous if you got too close. But before the ballads turned her into a legend, before the dime novels made her into an outlaw sweetheart, she was just a girl with wildfire in her blood and danger breathing down her neck, and before she disappeared, she burned. The first time the world heard her name, it was scribbled in pencil on a wanted poster nailed to a saloon wall in Guthrie. Rose Dunn, accomplice, accessory, or angel. $500 reward. Use caution, shoots well, smiles better. She was 17. Already an outlaw, already halfway myth, and nobody knew the half of it. It started in the bloodlands between Kansas and Oklahoma, a jagged stretch of Badland River and twisted mesquite where the law thinned like morning fog and bandits grew like prairie fire. Rose was the youngest of 10, the only girl. Her mother died too early to warn her which kind of men ruin lives, and her brothers were outlaws by trade, rustlers, gamblers, bootleggers, depending on the week. They taught her cards, taught her how to cheat, how to shoot with both hands and smile while doing it. They called her Little Britches, not for her size, but for the way she carried herself like a fuse already lit. By 16, she could outride most grown men. She could gut a fish, clean a rifle, and quote scripture with a straight face while hiding a derringer in her garter. Men underestimated her, right up until they didn't. And then they bled. But it wasn't grit alone that turned her into a legend. It was love, the kind that wraps around your throat and whispers like freedom until it starts to squeeze. His name was George Bitter Creek Newcomb. He rode with the Doolin-Dalton gang, train robbers, bank busters, killers. He was 20 years older. She didn't care. He showed up at her family's homestead one July afternoon, blood on his shirt, bounty on his head, smile full of sin, and she was his from that moment on. Not kidnapped, not seduced, just gone. Chasing something bigger than barns and prayer meetings. And she found it. Their nights were made of gunpowder and whispered plans. He taught her how to ride through thunder, how to sleep with one eye open and a finger on the trigger. She learned which marshals would shoot you in the back and which would smile while they did it. They made love under stars and woke to horse hooves and the sharp edge of dawn. Rose soaked it all in like whiskey, not because she was naive, but because for the first time in her life, she felt alive. Bitter Creek was fast, fast with his guns, fast with his mouth, fast with his goodbyes, but when he looked at Rose, the outlaw faded. He called her darlin' and my Rose, and once, just once, freedom. She followed him everywhere, caves, cabins, canyons carved out of nowhere. The wild bunch took to her, liked her, feared her too, not because she was cruel, but because she listened more than she spoke and remembered what everyone else forgot. She was precise, sharp, and she could shoot the wings off a fly from 10 yards. But love like theirs doesn't survive long in the dust, not with the Pinkertons 3 days behind and the horses 2 days lame. It unraveled in 1895, Ingalls, Oklahoma. Dry air, thick with waiting. The marshals had tracked the gang, set up an ambush at the livery. The shootout that followed was hell in daylight. Gunfire through windows, horses screaming, smoke so thick it turned the world blind. Rose was in the saloon with Bitter Creek when it started. He kissed her hard, once. "I'll come back," he said. She didn't see him again for 9 months. She hid, moved from safe house to safe house, disguised herself as a boy, then a widow. Sometimes just a rumor, someone swearing they saw a girl in a church lighting candles for sins too new to name. They called her a ghost. And maybe she was. But Bitter Creek found her again. He came on a cold spring morning in 1896, rode up to her cabin just as the trees caught fire with sunrise. He looked older, tired, carried wounds she couldn't see. She opened the door like no time had passed. For one night it hadn't. They sat by the fire, drank coffee, she bandaged his hand. He told her he was done running, said, "No more banks, no more gangs, just you, me, and whatever's west of this hell." She smiled, said yes, but the past doesn't forget, and the law doesn't sleep, especially when the price on your head is $5,000 dead or alive and someone close to you knows where you'll be. The morning Bitter Creek died was quiet. No warning, no dogs barking, no shimmer of metal on the ridge, just the soft whistle of prairie wind and the sound of a man ready to leave the outlaw life behind. Rose was in the kitchen making biscuits. He was outside saddling the horses. They'd planned to ride west, to Arizona, maybe Mexico, anywhere without gallows. Then came the shots. 3 sharp, final, a pause, then 3 more. Rose ran to the porch. She didn't scream, didn't fall to her knees like the ballads say. She just stared at the smoke curling from the brush line, watched the marshals move in like vultures cashing in, and saw Bitter Creek's body crumpled near the fence, a red bloom growing where his heart had been. Her brothers had betrayed them. The Dunn boys, outlaws themselves once, did the unthinkable. They struck a deal with the law, turned in George Bitter Creek Newcomb for a full pardon and a payday. They shot him in the back, called it justice, cashed the reward, and vanished like cowards under a storm sky. Rose didn't scream, didn't curse, didn't cry. She just walked back inside, picked up the tin cup he'd left on the table, and tossed it into the fire. It hissed against the coals like it knew what had been lost. That same night, the papers rolled out across the West. Rose Dunn's bandit lover shot dead. Girl may be next. They printed her face, softer than truth, younger than fact, but with eyes that burned like gunpowder waiting on a spark. She ran again, but this time there was no one left to run with. No gang, no Bitter Creek, no future carved from stolen nights and firelight promises. Just a girl alone, and the legend now trailing behind her like a noose braided with rose stems and regret. For weeks they hunted her, U.S. Marshals, bounty men, Pinkertons, but no one catches a ghost. She changed her name, dyed her hair, slipped into cities, drifted through towns, disappeared into prairies and memory. Some said she married a rich man in Texas and lived behind lace curtains and quiet Sundays. Others said she tracked her brothers down one by one, killed them cold, and walked away humming an old church tune. Some say she rides still, beneath the moon, across the high plains, in the places where outlaws still whisper her name like a prayer they're too scared to finish. But the truth? That's where history always stumbles. Because the truth isn't loud, it's buried deep, like roots in dry earth. And the truth about Rose Dunn is simple. She didn't vanish. She bloomed, then broke, and became something else. The last confirmed sighting of Rose Dunn came in 1955, Oklahoma City. A quiet funeral. Not hers, but someone from the old days. Someone who remembered the dust, the gunfire, the hunger for freedom. No cameras, no headlines. Just an old woman in a black dress standing at the back of a chapel. She left before anyone could ask her name. But a retired reporter, one who used to chase outlaw stories across Indian territory, swore it was her. "Same eyes," he said. "Same walk. Slower now, but the same spine, like the West still lived in her bones." She never gave interviews, never wrote her story down. Hollywood came calling more than once, and she never opened the door. Because Rose Dunn didn't need to explain herself. She had lived it. Lived harder, faster, freer than most men could imagine. The pieces we do have, the facts stitched together from rumor and record, say she took a new name, maybe two, worked as a seamstress for a while, then a teacher, maybe ran a boarding house in a town too small to notice the glint of steel behind her smile. In one place, she was remembered for sitting on her porch, reading Emily Dickinson aloud like scripture. In another, she taught local girls how to shoot tin cans off a fence and said only, "Shoot straight. Never let a man talk you out of your aim." She never remarried, never talked about Bitter Creek, not where anyone could write it down. But every year on the anniversary of his death, a single red rose appeared on the steps of the church in Ingalls. No note, no footprints. Just the ghost of a flower and the memory of a man who once called her freedom. They say memory fades, but legend doesn't. Rose Dunn became both, a footnote in history books, a muse in outlaw ballads, a warning in lipstick and lead for every woman who ever loved too hard, too fast, and too dangerously to survive. And in the wind that curls through the Cimarron at dusk, you can still hear her, hooves on stone, the cock of a revolver, and a girl's low laughter riding the air like thunder waiting to break. Because some flowers don't wilt, they vanish, and in doing so, become immortal. Coming next, her secret life after the outlaw years, her final sighting in 1955, and how a ghost story became a symbol for every woman who loved too hard, too fast, and too dangerously to survive. The last confirmed sighting of Rose Dunn came in 1955, Oklahoma City. A funeral, quiet, unremarkable, held not for her but for someone who'd once ridden the wind and dust alongside her in the territory days. There was no press, no fanfare, just an old woman in a plain black dress who stood at the back, silent and watchful. Before anyone could ask her name, she slipped out the door. But a retired reporter swore he knew her. "Same eyes," he whispered. "Same walk, slower now, but the same spine, like the West was still breathing through her bones." She never gave interviews, never wrote a memoir, never sold her story to Hollywood, though they came knocking more than once. Because Rose Dunn wasn't the kind of woman who explained herself. She didn't need to. She'd already lived it. The truth, best as anyone can piece together, is this. After Bitter Creek's death, Rose disappeared into a life nothing like the songs they sang about her. She changed her name, maybe twice, worked as a seamstress, a teacher, a whisper. For a while, she may have run a boarding house. In one town, folks remembered a lady who recited Emily Dickinson on her porch like scripture. In another, girls were taught to shoot tin cans off the fence, always followed by a wink and a warning. Shoot straight, and don't ever let a man talk you out of your aim. She never remarried, never spoke his name, at least not where anyone could write it down. But every year on the anniversary of Bitter Creek's death, a single red rose was left on the steps of the church in Ingalls. No note, no footprints, just silence, just memory. They say memory fades, but legends don't. Rose Dunn became both. To historians, she was a footnote. To balladeers, a muse. To women who loved without apology, she was a warning wrapped in silk and steel. And if you stand out in the Cimarron wind, in that hush between dusk and full dark, you might still hear it. Hooves on stone, the echo of a pistol cocked, and laughter, sharp, bright, impossible to catch. Because some flowers don't wilt, they vanish, and in doing so, they become immortal. The town of Tombstone had no saints, only survivors. It was a furnace of greed, grit, and gunfire where ambition and bullets filled the air like dust. Men carved their names into wooden saloons and gravestones alike. But among the cowards playing kings, gamblers chasing luck, and lawmen craving legacy, one woman stood taller than them all. Not in size, but in spirit. They called her Big Nose Kate, not as insult, but out of respect, and maybe fear, because she didn't just outdrink the cowboys, outshoot the drunks, or outlast the gunmen. She outlived the West itself, before the OK Corral stained the dust red, before Wyatt Earp was etched into myth, before Doc Holliday became a deathbed legend. Kate was there, watching, learning, waiting, and when the smoke cleared, she was the one still standing. Born Mary Catherine Horany in Hungary, 1850, she was the daughter of a physician who once treated royalty. Her mother wore silk gloves. Her childhood knew chandeliers. But empires fall, and so did hers. By age 10, she was aboard a ship to America. By 11, orphaned. By 14, she ran from the nuns. By 15, she drank her first whiskey. By 16, she worked as a prostitute in Dodge City. Not out of shame, but strategy. Because Kate understood something men never quite grasped. In the West, power wasn't earned through status or politeness. It came through leverage and survival. Kate was a survivor. Coming next, when Kate met Doc Holliday, and together they lit a fuse under Tombstone that would never burn out. The first time she saw Doc Holliday, he was slumped outside a saloon in Dodge City, bleeding, coughing red into a handkerchief he folded like a poker hand. Most people crossed the street. Kate crossed toward him, lit a cigarette, and asked if he was dying or just pretending. "A bit of both," he said, grinning through blood. That moment started a love story more like a war. Doc, Southern-born, educated, a dentist turned gambler turned killer. Kate, feral, brilliant, sharp-tongued, untamed. Together they were chaos in boots. They drank, fought, ran, and survived. She dragged him from fires. He held her when she cried in alleyways. They cursed each other like devils and made up like thunder. No one understood what bound them, but no one dared interfere. In 1880, they followed silver rumors to Tombstone, Arizona, a place where lawmen and criminals shared bar stools and bullets. She ran a boarding house and sometimes returned to sex work. Her way, her terms. He gambled, drank, and drifted into the orbit of the Earp brothers. Kate didn't like Wyatt Earp, said he was too polished, too theatrical. Doc never answered, but he stayed. That told her enough. Then everything burned. October 26, 1881. The gunfight at the OK Corral. 30 seconds, 30 shots, 3 men dead, 1 legend born. Kate wasn't there. She never claimed to be. But she felt it. In the air, in the silence, in the blood Doc brought home with him. She cleaned him without a word. Rag, whiskey, silence. That ache between them, love, fire, regret, never left. The Earps became heroes. Doc became infamous. Kate became invisible, until they tried to use her. They said she signed a statement blaming Doc for a murder and a fire, said she was drunk, broken, vulnerable. When the cold hit and she sobered up, it was too late. Her name was on the warrant. Doc in jail. Her heart torn in half. But Kate wasn't finished. She re-emerged, eyes blazing, with a statement of her own. "I was coerced. I was lied to. I retract everything." Doc was freed, but the trust between them died. Doc left Tombstone soon after, chasing redemption or death, maybe both. Kate stayed behind. Coming next, Doc's slow, quiet death. Kate's long, invisible life, and how she claimed her story back not with bullets, but with memory. Doc died in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, coughing, weak, alone, a Bible beside him, no gun in his hand, no cards on the table. Just the ghosts. The doctors called it a miracle he'd lasted so long. Kate would have called it spite. She wasn't there. But she knew. Some say she saw him one last time. Rode a train north with a pistol hidden in a Bible and grief stitched into her coat. Maybe. But Kate never said. She didn't speak of love like other women. She wore it like a scar. After Doc's death, she faded, not into myth, but into poverty. Worked odd jobs, laundress, midwife, ghost, lived in Arizona, New Mexico, nowhere at all. In 1931, she applied for a Confederate widow's pension, claimed she'd married Doc back in 1877. No certificate, no photos, just a name signed in ink. Mary Catherine Cummings, formerly Kate Elder, called Big Nose Kate. No shame, no apology, just truth. She died in 1940 at the Arizona Pioneers' home in Prescott. 90 years old, blind in one eye, no teeth, still proud, still unbroken. The West had forgotten her. But she hadn't forgotten the West. When asked once what she thought of the men who became legends, Doc, Wyatt, the cowboys, she didn't blink. "They all died," she said. "I didn't." And with that, Big Nose Kate did what no other woman of the West had done. She became history. They weren't looking for glory. They weren't chasing legends. They were just trying to survive in a world that wasn't built for them. Josie Bassett, Rose Dunn, Big Nose Kate. Names whispered in saloons, written in blood and carried by wind across the high plains. They didn't wear crowns. They wore dust. They didn't wait to be saved. They drew their own lines in the dirt and dared the world to cross them. History remembers the men with badges and bullets, but these women, they were fire in a time of silence, thunder in a world built on rules. They didn't just live through the Wild West, they became it. And if you ever find yourself riding through the dust, with the sky stretched wide and the road uncertain, listen close. You might just hear their laughter on the wind.